actually compelled to sit in the.
They're eager to learn, that's why.
Yeah, wonderful. So good to be with you. So here is what I was thinking of doing with you. You know, you came to the session and I spoke this morning, so you hopefully listened to all that I said about my own commitment to Hinduism, the importance of of committing oneself to religious teachings that are true, that are good for you, and are good for the community in which you live. And that's important because it is sad that there's sometimes religious or teachings that are given, sadly, that may not always be good for the people to whom those teachings are given. And their religious beliefs also, not speaking only necessarily about the Hindu tradition, that can also be destructive of life in communities. So we have to be, we have to exercise good judgment in which teachings we commit ourselves to. So that's one, my presentation this morning you have with you, and I'm willing to and happy to talk to you further about what I said. Last night, I don't know if any of you were here in the temple, I also gave a lecture last night for the adults where I spoke about, specifically about the status of Hindu women in our Hindu tradition. So what I'm going to do this afternoon, if it's acceptable to you all, here's my plan. I want to give you a sort of a concise summary of what I said last night about the status of women in our Hindu tradition, and then expand on that in a discussion format. And we can also include issues from this morning if you want me to speak about any of those things. The issue of women in the Hindu tradition is a particularly difficult one. It's a painful illustration, I would put it in this way. It's a painful illustration of the problem of the gulf or the gap between religious ideal and the social reality. That's a challenge for the Hindu tradition, for us as Hindus. It's a challenge for many traditions as well. How do we make religious teaching, theology, religious values, how do we translate these into social reality? How do we build that gap between ideal and reality? So let me start with the ideal. Now, this morning I said that it's very important for us as Hindus to try to determine and to try to understand what I will call the non-negotiable teachings of our tradition. In other words, those teachings that can't be compromised, those teachings that require loyalty, fidelity, those teachings which we consider the core teachings of the tradition. If, in other words, a teaching which you give up, somehow you will no longer be Hindu. It is so important. Now, if you ask me, what is the teaching that I consider to be a non-negotiable, a core teaching of the Hindu tradition, I will say that core teaching is the existence of God equally, identically in all beings. You find that all of our religious texts return to this teaching again and again. There is a very beautiful section in the Ramayana where Lakshmana asks his brother Sri Ram a series of questions. And one of the questions he asks him, he says, what is knowledge? What is jnana? And Sri Ram answers him in 5 words. He says, Dekha Brahma Saman Sabamahi. Dekha means to see. To see God. Sava, in all. Sama, in the same way, identically present in all beings. 5 words he defined wisdom. He says, Jnana is to see God present equally in everyone, in all beings. That for me is a very essential tradition, teaching. As a basis of that, I am called as a Hindu to value every human being, to respect every human being, whoever she or he is, Hindu or someone who is not Hindu, no one is excluded. Now, on the basis of that core teaching, we express value for every human being. This is the teaching from which, as a Hindu, we derive dignity and value and worth for human beings. In other words, the worth of the human being is derived from the fact that he or she embodies the divine. So that which is the highest value in our tradition is God. God is Satyam, God is of the highest value. And therefore that which has the highest value is present in everyone. So through the presence of that one, every human being gets value. This teaching comes again and again in our tradition. So I would put it in this way, that the value of every human being in the Hindu tradition is an intrinsic one. You don't derive it from another human being. We don't look to another human being to give us value. Value is an intrinsic one. And it comes from that presence of God. God entered into each one of us deeply. That gives us dignity. That gives us worth. Now, when something has instrumental value as opposed to intrinsic value, instrumental value comes from outside of yourself. Like in what we call a patriarchal culture. And there are many patriarchal societies, past and present. Patriarchal societies, in patriarchal cultures, the value of woman was seen as coming from the relationships with men. In other words, patriarchal cultures do not affirm the intrinsic dignity of woman. The value of a woman comes from a relationship with a male figure, who is often the dominant and powerful figure. So, Indian culture has not been, and this is where we have to also look at ourselves deeply, this gap between ideal and reality. Indian culture has not been exempt from patriarchy. We have manifestations of patriarchy in our culture, which has also been negative as women. So while we have a great ideal, reality doesn't always reflect that ideal. Let me give you 4 examples, and I'll touch them quickly, where I see this gap between ideal and reality. I told you what the theological ideal is. One, although it is changing, and gladly so, but the status of the widow in Hindu culture has not always been a good one. And in other words, when a woman lost her husband, she became a sort of what is called in Sanskrit amangali. She became an inauspicious figure. She was not allowed to participate in religious ritual. She was not allowed to participate in the social life of the community. Sometimes she was ostracized, sent to live in a monastic type of institution. In some cases, to shave her head and to wear a particular kind of garb. She had lost her reason to be because she has lost her husband. Because the value came from that male relationship that may no longer, again, we don't know how to value this woman. Because she was not given intrinsic value that our tradition says she should be given. I don't know if any of you, it was a controversial film, but it did deal with that problem. The film Water. Did you see Water? Made based in Varanasi and dealt with the plight of the widow. Well, there are, in fact, homes like that in Vrindavan and other places where widows go to live because they no longer have a place in their family. That's one example. The second example is, gladly, it's disappearing in places like Canada and the United States. It's outlawed in India, but still widely practiced. And this is the practice of dowry. Now, whatever might have been its origins, and some said, the dowry, and it made sense, the kind of a gift given to a bride and a bridegroom at the time of marriage as a way of giving them a start in life with some of the essentials that they needed. But that has become corrupted today. The dowry has become a condition of marriage. In other words, the dowry is used in a way that has transformed Hindu marriage from being a sanskara to a commercial enterprise. The demands are made before the marriage and even after the marriage. Demands made on the family of the bride to keep this supply of goods to the bridegroom's family with threats, towards the bride. And it gets even worse than that, because there's this dark side to it where bride murders in India have been on the rise. One figure from the government of India puts it at about 8,391 women who are killed each year. That's about one woman every 90 minutes. And these are considered to be dowry deaths. In most cases, they are mysterious fires in kitchens. But everyone knows.
Because they couldn't.
Yes, they couldn't, exactly. And now there's an opportunity now to have a new marriage by getting rid of. Which brings me to the third point. And that is, given that, especially given the problems of dowry, therefore you have this preference for the male child in many communities in South Asia. This is also true of China and other parts of the Asian world, but something that is also there very much in India. The preference for the boy child over the girl. So that many families tend to celebrate when there's a birth of a boy, but not with the same exuberance when there's a girl, because the dowry is such a burdensome matter that once you have a daughter, a beautiful daughter, immediately you begin to think, now I have to put aside economic resources, valuable family resources in order to save for her marriage. So, the girl child becomes an unwanted child who is seen as a liability to the family, which then results, again, it's outlawed, but still it's widely practiced, which then leads to the practice of selective sex abortion. Where families use, life-giving technology, I have to say, like amniocentesis, ultrasound, but it's used to tell the sex of the child and to abort if it's a girl child. Now, in our Hindu tradition, abortion is not at all sanctioned, it's not at all approved. It is a form of himsa, it's a form of injury. Of course, there are exceptions where the health of the mother is concerned, or in case of rape and so on, but we do not condone abortion. But here you have, the practice of abortion as a form of sex selection, which is, for me, it contradicts the highest teachings of our tradition. And the last one is one that you know about, and that is domestic violence towards women. In the United States, a woman is beaten by her husband every 15 seconds. In Canada also, it's a growing problem. 80% of spousal victims in Canada are women. 26% of all reported crimes in Canada are domestic violence crimes, and women, whether they are parents, their elders, their children, it is the female who is the victim of that. So I'm making this point because I think as young Hindu men, and especially young men sitting in this room, and young women, you are called upon to think and to act, to make this, to bridge this gap between ideal and reality. If our tradition, as I said, teaches that a deep worth and value for the human being, and this includes, of course, women, what are we going to do to ensure that this is reflected in our treatment of women in our communities? If you are taught, if you are the father, the mother or father of a girl, you know, what kind of self-esteem are you going to ensure that your daughter grows up with? What will you say to her on the basis of the Hindu tradition that make her own herself to be a person of value and worth, so that she doesn't grow up thinking of herself lesser and therefore, you know, allowing herself to be ill-treated and abused in a relationship. And sometimes, you know, religion should be at the forefront. Our religion should be at the forefront of solving these problems. Sometimes, unfortunately, it is not. Let me give you an example that I shared with my audience last night. This comes from a book written by a very, very well-known Indian Swami teacher. And this book is written in the form of questions and answers. So, in this book, he has a question. He asks himself, what should a wife do if her husband beats her? Then he gives the answer. This book is called How to Live a Householder's Life. It's what should a wife do if her husband beats her? This book is just about 10, 12 years old. And so he replies, listen to this carefully, it's almost unbelievable, but listen to what he writes. The wife should think that she is paying the debt of her previous life, and that her sins have been destroyed, and that she is becoming pure. So what, you know, what a terrible interpretation of the Hindu tradition and of karma. You know, I mean, it's wrong to interpret karma to legitimize violence and to say that in the face of violence one should not do anything. I mean, he's saying that the woman should just passively accept this and see it as her destiny, as a karmic destiny to be abused, to be punished. That's not the Hindu tradition. That's a wrong interpretation. And when we come across such interpretations, we have to challenge them. We have to challenge these interpretations very strongly and say that's not right. My tradition teaches that every human being has dignity and value and worth, and that our highest ideal is ahimsa. And domestic abuse is a form of violence, it's a form of himsa, it's not ahimsa. You know, we have to raise our voices in the sense that, you know, we have to be Hindus, young Hindu men and women have to be at the forefront of standing up against all forms of violence. Because the highest ideal of our tradition is non-violence, and therefore non-violence has to lead us to an activism against all expressions of violence, including and especially violence towards women that I'm really emphasizing today. But that requires that we have a broader understanding of what ahimsa is. So in other words, domestic violence is a violation of ahimsa. Okay. Ill-treating a widow is a violation of ahimsa. Women having to abort female fetuses, not because they want to abort a female fetus, because societal pressure pushes them and forces them to do it. That's ahimsa. It's a violation of the ethic of ahimsa. So we have to expand our understanding of ahimsa to see the many faces of violence, you know, in our communities, in our nation, and in our world. And we have to return to those great teachings of our tradition, like the one that I mentioned, the intrinsic value of women. So I see this as a significant issue for us. I see this as a challenge. One of the challenges. There are many other issues that we are challenged in a similar way. This challenge of bringing ideal and reality together. One of the great things about our tradition, you know, many traditions struggle today. The Christian tradition, in many ways, is struggling with the question of, can we think of God as female? You know, can we use feminine pronouns for God? Can we imagine God to be feminine? And they can't. It's not very easy. We have no problems with that. You know, we know that we can think of God as male. We can think of God as female also. We have both kinds of murtis in our temples. But to worship God as feminine has to mean also honoring women. You know, when we perform Devi Puja, Durga Puja, we recite Devi Mahatmya, and that's a very beautiful poetic composition. And every verse begins Ya Devi Sarva Bhuteshu Shakti Rupena Samstita Namastasyai 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 Namo Namah. The word only a single word changes in it. Ya Devi Sarva Bhuteshu Shakti Rupena Ya Devi Sarva Bhuteshu Daya Rupe. One word changes, but everything else remains the same. And look at the beautiful composition. Who is the goddess that we worship? Ya Devi Sarva Bhuteshu. Coming back to that teaching. That goddess who lives in all beings. Sarva Bhuteshu, Sarva Bhuteshu, Sarva Bhuteshu. And how do we honor her? We honor her through words, speaking, respectful words, of course, attitudes of respect and reverence in our minds, and by generous hospitality, by caring for her, offering those things that are life-giving, water, food, shelter, all these symbolic offerings, but we express reverence by caring, actions. And so if we say Ya Devi Sarva Bhuteshwara, this is the divine that lives in all beings, then as a Hindu, if you come from a tradition, if you come from a tradition where the God that you worship lives in some remote part of this universe, you could say, okay, I can worship God and treat people as I want because that God is not here in them. But we belong to a tradition that teaches centrally Ya Devi Sarva Bhuteshu, that the God we worship is a God that is in everyone. So you can't express honor for God and dishonor human beings. That's a betrayal of the Hindu tradition. You can't honor God and dishonor human beings. Because to dishonor the human being, to be violent to the human being, to treat people unjustly and without dignity is also dishonoring God, who lives and who dwells in all beings. So this was this is a quick summary of my lecture last night, and then of course you had what I said this morning. So I think I will stop here now, and we had very engaging discussion this morning with the first two groups I met. I'm sure we'll have the same with you. Please feel free, especially to disagree with me. That makes a more interesting conversation for me. If you agree with me, I don't learn much. So feel free and relax. Speak from your heart. Speak what is on your mind. So just tell us, for the sake of everyone, just tell us your name. So
Sean.
Sean, yeah.
Just expanding on what you spoke about.
Yes, Sean. So my role as a parent. So I have a stairway in my house, and when my kids were young, they would be racing up and down that stairway, and down at the bottom of the stairway is wooden. So I tell them again and again, don't run down that stairs. You're going to fall. You're going to hurt yourself. Of course, they don't listen to me, and they run, and they fall, and I hear the head hitting the wooden floor, and I hear the scream. What as a parent do? I know what caused it. I know there was a cause and effect situation. So head hit the floor, that's the effect. Cause is running fast down the carpeted stairs. So I understand cause and effect. So now, and I hear the scream, and I am in another part of the house. I can say as a father, you look for it. As you're tempted to say, and I don't go. I told you 1,000 times, don't run like that. But I hear my child cry. I know what caused it, and I know I had cautioned the child before. But in that moment, more important than my understanding of cause and effect is my compassion as a father, my love as a father for my child. Daya. Daya, which is compassion or love, becomes more important than karma. I go and I lift the child, and I make sure the child is not hurt. So more important, we do have the teaching on karma shown, of course, that they're causes and causes produce effects. But knowing the reason, if we could know, and we don't know, that's one good thing about karma, we don't know. But if even we knew, that's conceding, if even we knew, as in this example I gave you, we don't know. But if even we knew, it does not justify our non-action. As a Hindu, our highest obligation is daya, is service. Even when I can't change, you know, if you think, I mean, and sometimes, you know, people say that to me, and you know, they visit someone who is very sick in a hospital, even someone who is in hospice care, and they would say, you know, well, what can you do? You know, it's your karma. And they think that perhaps they're saying something that has solace. We don't know. We don't know. Our purpose in life is not to justify why people suffer and to give us a reason not to opt out, as you said. But our obligations is to be compassionate, to be caring. That is the obligation of a Hindu, and that's what has to direct how we understand. Karma doesn't exempt us from our obligations to serve others, to help others, to be caring, to be compassionate. Daya is ultimate. So karma should not be used as an excuse for the non-fulfillment of our obligations to each other. Other questions, please? You are susceptible to these weaknesses as other communities, and that's often the reason why we get that. Bindi, are you going to ask something?
No. I'll give another question.
Okay.
Sure. About the sort of
pushes women.
Pushes us, right?
Yeah.
But when you think about it, abortion on the whole is somewhat caused by society pressure also. Because
Well,
just giving you my train of thought now. Because I was thinking, I mean, before today I didn't think about abortion. I never had an opinion on it, right? It's just.
And it is seen as an act of himsa or injury, except, as I said, if there are other reasons. And you know, in the case of rape or the health of the mother, our tradition, you know, it's compassion. Again, because of compassion, you can't put a woman through that kind of suffering. It's care and concern for the well-being of the mother. But always you know that there is a life that is involved there. So that's what our tradition teaches about the value of life and the sanctity of life. Were you going to ask me something else?
So a lot of our
I know that many women agonize over this issue that you have raised. So generally speaking, in a Hindu family, as you said, the male, especially the eldest male, has the obligation, responsibility to perform what we call anti-HD sanskar, the final ritual for departed mother or father. Sometimes, you know, if there are no sons in the family, the tendency is to look for some male even outside of the family, a nephew or someone. The daughters will be bypassed, generally speaking. I think that this practice may have originated from particular historical circumstances. Let me explain what I mean. You know, so traditionally, the Hindu family structure was the joint family structure. In other words, where the sons and their wives lived with their parents. When a daughter got married, you know, she left the ancestral home and she became part of her husband's home. And usually she would have lived some distance from her husband in traditional India. So when that occurred, and think also of the conditions in tropical India, the need for quick disposal of a body, it was well timed to inform a relative, and in the conditions of transport, you know, you couldn't make it in time before the decay process started. So the sons were there, they were the ones responsible the eldest son as now the head of the family for the performance of the ritual. But I think that in our current conditions, I mean, we've moved so much now from the joint family, especially in the Western world, to the nuclear family, that there's an equal availability of the daughter and the son now, after the death of a father, of a mother. And my own feeling is, my own thought on this is that there is no good religious reason. I can't find a good religious reason. If a daughter is available and if she's willing, that she should be allowed to perform the funeral ritual of a father or mother. And if her brothers, if there's a situation where you have sons and daughters, they should join together. It should be a ritual that is done by both brothers and sisters for their parents. There's no need to exclude a daughter from the performing the final ritual for a father. And recently in India, it was debated because one of Gandhi's grandsons, Ramchandra Gandhi, had passed away. He had only a daughter who performed his funeral, ceremony. Yes, please. We like the devil's advocate. Because we don't question that. Let me put it in that way. I'll be honest with you. You may disagree. I question it. I question it for this reason. That the tradition, in the traditional understanding, when you gave your daughter away in marriage, somehow it was understood almost as a severing of that bond with her. She became another person's, as you said, another member of another person's family. I have experience, growing up, where with my uncles, as I said, getting married, and when their wives, the father of their wives visited, because we lived nearby, they would not eat at the daughter's home. They would not even accept a drink of water from the daughter's home, because that was, they had given her away. Therefore, they could not even accept anything from her. It was such a radical severing of the relationship. I don't see the need. I mean, that must be a very painful thing. And I don't see why, if I have a daughter as I have, when she's married, that my relationship with her is so transformed that she radically becomes somebody else's and no longer is my daughter. I don't think there's any need for that. I mean, she's not property. We're speaking about human relations. I can't give my daughter in marriage as I'll give somebody a material gift, which totally becomes there. This is a child that I have nurtured in my home, with whom I have a deep and lifelong relationship.
Again, being the devil.
Yes. So the devil is still alive.